Hello and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Please sign up at my Patreon to get episodes earlier, bonuses, to have a say on future content, and to interact with me and other Warbirders directly. But mainly you'll have the satisfaction of helping keep this podcast going. You can also toss me a tip via PayPal at WOWB17, or even just drop me a review. Thank you for your support. Now on to the show. Hello, Warbirders. Okay, so if you've just discovered this podcast with this episode, you've arrived at a weird place, to be honest. I usually profile an individual World War II warbird from design to the prototype, operational history, and post-war life of the aircraft. But from time to time I break that up by drilling down deeper to explain an element that might be generally taken for granted or misunderstood. A long time ago, I started a series on World War II aero engines with episodes called The Quest for Power 1, Cylinders, Quest for Power 2, Superchargers and Turbochargers. Then to finish this series, I'm releasing 3 mini episodes. The last one was about water and nitrous oxide injection. This one is on superfuels, and the last one will be about turbo compounding. Honestly, each episode builds on the next, so why not go back and catch up? We'll be waiting. Patreon supporters are getting all these mini episodes all at once, so if you like the topic and you'd like to help support me, why not pop over to Patreon and join? Alright, enough blah blah blah. Let's dive in. Today I'm going to tackle maybe the biggest assumption of all, that we all know what gasoline is. I mean, unless you're 150 years old, or maybe if you're Amish or something, but if you're Amish, why are you listening to this? You've been living with this stuff your whole life. As a baby, you were probably driven home from the hospital in a vehicle powered by gasoline. Growing up, you probably loved or hated the smell of it when a parent was pumping it into your family vehicle. I love it, by the way. And as an adult, you probably fret over the price of it more than any other item that you buy. In fact, just last night, I almost ran out of it, trying to save 15 cents per liter on a road trip. In the manual, my vehicle's fuel capacity is 70 liters, and I pumped in 70.2 liters when I finally did fill up. I do not recommend this at all. Okay, so do they still call it petrol in Europe? I think they do. Well, here in North America, it's generally just called gas. And where I live in Quebec, it's sometimes spelled gaz with a Z. Okay, Z for all our non-Commonwealth types out there. Let's look a little at the history of this stuff. The origins of gasoline can be traced back to the early 19th century when crude oil was first distilled to produce kerosene as a fuel for lighting in lamps. Before this, whale oil was the primary source of liquid fuel for lighting. Gasoline was actually a byproduct of the process of making crude oil into kerosene and was initially considered a waste product and often discarded, dumped in pits, and burned. The advent of the internal combustion engine in the late 19th century marked a turning point for gasoline. In 1876, Nicholas Otto developed the 4-stroke engine, which used gasoline as a fuel. This innovation laid the groundwork for the widespread adaptation of gasoline-powered vehicles. To meet the growing demand, oil companies invested heavily in refining technologies. The development of thermal cracking in the 1910s, pioneered by William Burton, allowed refiners to break down heavier hydrocarbons into lighter ones, increasing gasoline yields. This process was later enhanced by catalytic cracking in the 1930s, which used catalysts to improve efficiency and produce higher octane fuels. I've used the O word. And now that I've used the O word, we need to talk about octane. And this is going to get a little complicated. And I've also simplified it down some, so please cut me some slack here if you're an expert. Contrary to its use in marketing and general slang, octane does not mean power. In truth, it is two things. One, it is an actual physical component of gasoline. And secondly, it is a rating system to measure resistance to knocking. First, let's look at octane as a chemical, and we'll get back to the knocking thing in a moment. Gasoline is not just one thing, but rather a blend of components. Octane is one of those components, along with heptane that you never hear of. Adding octane, whose chemical name is actually 2,2,4-trimethylpentane, to the gasoline blend was found to reduce knocking, while increasing the amount of heptane increased knocking. So a rating system was devised where in a lab, pure octane was burned in a test engine, and its tendency to cause knocking was given the rating of 100. In the exact same conditions, pure heptane was also burned in the test engine, and its tendency to knock was given the rating of 0. Blends of gasoline are then tested and given a number that compares to that scale. A blend that tends to prevent knocking would have a higher number, while one that knocks easier would get a lower octane number. Okay, Brian, so what does all of that have to do with our airplane engines? And can you refresh me on what knocking is? Well, if you think back to the episodes on super and turbocharging and water injection, remember that the higher the engine compresses the fuel-air mixture, the more efficient and powerful they could be. But they always ran up against a limit where the compressed fuel-air charge would heat up and explode early before the timed spark, causing knocking. Once the engine started knocking, it would not produce higher power and could be damaged. Higher octane rated fuel would prevent the pre-explosion and thus prevent the knocking and allow for more squeezing, power, and efficiency. In the early 1930s, motor fuel for cars and trucks had a rating of about 40 octane, while aviation gasoline, known as avgas, had a rating of 70 to 80 octane. The oil companies cared the most about selling motor fuel because at that time aviation gasoline amounted to less than 0.5% of total gasoline consumption. Making higher octane rated gasoline by adding additives such as tetraethyl lead was possible, but crazy expensive to produce. Who the heck was going to buy this stuff when it cost $30 per gallon compared to 20 cents per gallon for regular motor fuel? And this is 1930s money we're talking about too. So it set up a kind of chicken and egg situation. Who was going to build the high compression engines to burn this type of fuel if it wasn't available? And who was going to make the fuel if it had no market? Someone needed to break the impasse. And that someone was James H. Jimmy Doolittle. Yes, the raid on Tokyo guy and the future general in the USAAF's air war in Europe. Of all the personalities from that era, I'd love to have a beer with Jimmy Doolittle. Not only was he extraordinarily brave, he was both famous as an air racer and already had the Distinguished Flying Cross for record-breaking flights even before the war broke out. but he was also crazy smart. He was awarded MIT's first doctorate in aeronautical engineering. In the early 1930s, Doolittle began this dance between Shell Oil, the U.S. Army procurement folks, and engine manufacturers to break the chicken-egg dilemma. He got the manufacturers to make the high-compression engines. He got Shell to make the high-octane fuel, and got the Army to buy enough of it. He was probably the only personality that could have done it, with his fame, his smarts, and his status in the Army. And by the time the Battle of Britain rolled around, there was sufficient production for supplies of 100-octane fuel to help win that battle. Tim Palooka, in the journal Invention and Technology in 2005, wrote, open quotes, Luftwaffe pilots couldn't believe that they were facing the same planes that they had fought successfully over France a few months before. The planes were the same, but the fuel wasn't. Close quotes. Well, not quite. The engines did need to be modified to handle the new fuel, but it was worth it. Converting from 87 to 100 octane fuel increased the RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes' top speed by 25 to 34 miles per hour up to 10,000 feet. That's a battle-winning difference. By the time 1944 rolled around, the U.S. introduced 115, 145 octane fuel. This very high-performance blend was used in late war fighters like the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning, enabling them to run much higher boost pressures and get significant short-term power increases, great for dogfights and interceptions. And by the late war, RAF fighters were also using 100 to 130 and eventually 150 octane, sometimes called 150 grade fuel, in certain Rolls-Royce Merlin and Griffin engines, allowing for extreme boost pressures. So why did the Luftwaffe not adopt higher octane fuels? There's not a simple answer to the question. Yes, initially they were behind in the technology, although they certainly knew how to make 100 octane fuel. But it was a combination of shortages of the components to not only make the fuel, but also supply the metallurgy required to modify the engines to handle the higher compressions. Lastly, pressure from Allied bombing raids on production facilities did help. And I've even read that the push for jets in Germany was partly because it could skip the high-octane gasoline dilemma and jump to producing high power with a very low-grade fuel that is essentially kerosene. Remember that stuff? That's where we started this topic. They probably could have even run their jets on whale oil, because jets run on, just about anything. Japan had almost the same problems as Germany, except add in that all of their crude oil was shipped in from overseas, and their tankers were eventually being sunk in droves from U.S. torpedoes and mines. Instead of going to higher octane, Japan's gasoline supply sometimes slipped as low as 87 octane by the mid-war period due to shortages and poor refining capacity. But 100 and higher octane fuel was certainly a little known but major contributor to Allied victory in the air, which led to victory everywhere. So I hope that I've cleared up the mysteries of gasoline. Okay, be honest. Do you like these deep dive looks at the tech of the warbirds? Let me know in the comments if you appreciate this stuff. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you'll be able to roll right on into the next one on turbo compounding. And thank you for your support. Otherwise, you'll have to wait a little bit. Until next time.